They had already decided who he was the moment they saw him. A tired man wearing a worn leather jacket, carrying a sleeping little girl on his shoulder, stood quietly in front of the hotel desk. To them, he looked like nothing more than another exhausted traveler who had arrived too late. But within minutes, they would realize they had made the biggest mistake of their careers. There is a kind of exhaustion that goes far beyond sore muscles and sleepless nights. It settles deep inside a person's heart. It comes from carrying responsibilities alone, protecting someone you love, and continuing to move forward even when grief still follows you everywhere. Marcus Whitfield knew that feeling well. After a long flight, his shoulders felt heavy, but he barely noticed the discomfort anymore. His 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, slept peacefully against his chest, holding a worn teddy bear in her tiny arms. Loose strands of dark hair had escaped from the braids he had carefully tied that morning. In his other hand, Marcus carried a bouquet of red roses. Some petals had been slightly crushed during the trip, but he protected them as carefully as if they were made of glass. Tomorrow would mark 3 years since his wife Elena had passed away. Ever since losing her, Marcus had refused to let that day pass without flowers in the house. It had become a quiet tradition between him and Sophie. She always chose the vase. He always brought the roses. And no matter how painful the memories were, they honored them together. On that cold November evening, Marcus stepped through the revolving doors of the Aldridge Grand Hotel, hoping for nothing more than a peaceful night and a chance to rest before another. Difficult day arrived? From a distance, he looked exactly like what most people assumed he was. A weary father traveling alone with his daughter. What nobody in the lobby knew was that Marcus Whitfield wasn't simply staying at the hotel. He owned it. Marcus adjusted Sophie's weight gently against his shoulder and walked toward the reception desk. Behind the counter stood 2 women. One of them, a tall, blonde woman with her hair neatly tied back, glanced at Marcus for only a second before returning her eyes to the computer screen. The other employee stood beside her, casually scrolling through something on her tablet. Neither of them smiled. Neither greeted him. Marcus offered a polite smile anyway. "Good evening," he said softly, lowering his voice so he wouldn't wake Sophie. "I have a reservation under Whitfield." The blonde receptionist typed a few keys and stared at the monitor. After several seconds, she shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't find anything under that name." Marcus remained calm. "It may have been booked through the executive office," he explained. "Could you please check again?" The woman sighed quietly. "We're completely booked tonight," she replied. "There's a corporate event happening upstairs, and every room has already been assigned." Marcus looked down at his daughter sleeping peacefully in his arms. He wasn't asking for special treatment. He simply wanted the room that had already been reserved weeks ago. "I understand," he said kindly, "but we've had a long trip and my daughter is exhausted. I'd really appreciate it if you could take another look." The receptionist exchanged a quick glance with her co-worker. It was the kind of silent conversation people have when they believe they already know someone's story without bothering to ask. "I'm afraid there isn't much else I can do," she answered. "You might have better luck at another hotel nearby." The second employee finally looked up and added, "Traveling without confirming reservations beforehand can be difficult this time of year." Her tone wasn't openly rude, but it carried something colder: assumption, judgment, the belief that the tired man standing before them simply didn't belong there. Marcus took a slow breath. Years ago, situations like this might have frustrated him. Now they mostly saddened him, because he had learned something important after spending more than a decade building hotels. People reveal who they truly are when they believe the person standing in front of them has nothing to offer in return. At that moment, Marcus was just a weary father carrying a sleeping child, holding a bouquet of roses meant for a woman he could no longer give them to. And to the employees behind the desk, that was apparently all they saw. Marcus was about to ask for the manager when someone else noticed what was happening. A woman in her early 50s stepped out from a nearby hallway carrying neatly folded towels. Silver streaks ran through her dark hair, and unlike everyone else in the lobby, her expression held genuine warmth. Her name tag read Dolores. She slowed her pace for a moment. Her eyes moved from the sleeping child to the slightly crushed roses, then to the tired father standing quietly at the counter. She had spent more than 20 years working in hotels, long enough to recognize the difference between an impatient guest and a person who had simply reached the limits of exhaustion. Setting the towels down on a luggage cart, she walked over. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" Marcus turned toward her. There was something comforting about the way she spoke. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't judging. She was simply paying attention. "I believe there's been a mistake with my reservation," Marcus explained. "They can't seem to locate it, and I've been told the hotel is fully booked." Dolores glanced at the receptionists. "Did you check the executive booking section?" she asked. "Reservations made through the corporate office don't always appear in the standard search." The blonde receptionist shifted uncomfortably. "I already checked the system." Dolores smiled politely. "But did you check the secondary tab?" A brief silence followed. Reluctantly, the receptionist clicked through several menus. A few seconds later, her expression changed. "Oh," she looked back at Marcus. "There is a reservation. Mr. Whitfield, it was booked under executive accounts." Dolores nodded softly. "I thought there might be." Marcus didn't say anything. He simply watched as someone had finally taken less than a minute to do what others refused to do. But Dolores wasn't focused on proving anyone wrong. Instead, her eyes returned to the bouquet in Marcus's hand. "Those roses are beautiful," she said. "Are they for someone special?" Marcus looked down at them for a moment. A faint smile appeared on his face. "My wife," he answered quietly. "Tomorrow marks 3 years since she passed away." Dolores's expression softened immediately. "I'm so sorry." Marcus gently adjusted Sophie against his shoulder. "We used to buy flowers together every year," he said. "Now my daughter helps me continue the tradition." Dolores looked at the little girl sleeping peacefully. "She's precious," she whispered. "And she looks completely worn out." Marcus chuckled softly. "We both are." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Dolores noticed one of the rose stems bent awkwardly during the trip. Without hesitation, she carefully straightened it. It was such a small gesture, something most people would never even notice. But sometimes, kindness isn't measured by grand actions. Sometimes it's simply seeing what others overlook. "You shouldn't carry those upstairs like this," Dolores said. "Wait here. I think I can find a vase for them." And for the first time since walking into the hotel, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt all evening. Someone had finally seen him, not as a reservation number, not as an inconvenience, not as a stranger in an old jacket, but as a grieving husband, a tired father, and a man trying his best to keep a promise to someone he still loved. A few minutes later, Sophie's room key had been prepared, and Dolores returned carrying a simple glass vase. She carefully placed the roses inside and handed them to Marcus with a warm smile. "There," she said softly. "They deserve to stand proudly." Marcus accepted the vase gratefully. "Thank you," he replied. "That means more than you probably realize." Dolores smiled. "Sometimes people don't need grand gestures. They just need someone willing to notice." Marcus nodded. Then he looked back toward the reception desk. "May I speak with the general manager?" he asked. The blonde receptionist looked nervous. "Mr. Harrison is attending the corporate event upstairs. I'm not sure he's available right now." Marcus smiled politely. "I don't mind waiting." Dolores quietly picked up a nearby phone and dialed an extension. A few moments later, a man in his mid-50s hurried out from an elevator. He adjusted his suit jacket while walking quickly toward the lobby. At first, he seemed slightly annoyed at being called away from the event. But the moment his eyes landed on Marcus, everything changed. His expression froze. Color drained from his face. "Oh my goodness. Do you mind if I ask you something?" She nodded. "How long have you worked here?" 23 years, she replied. "I started cleaning rooms when my youngest son was only 4 years old. My husband passed away shortly before that. I raised 3 children on this job." Marcus remained silent for a moment. He finally understood why she had recognized his exhaustion so quickly. She had lived through it herself. "I've spent years teaching employees how to provide good service," Marcus said. "But what you showed my daughter and me that night can't be taught from a handbook." Dolores laughed softly. "I'm not a trainer. I'm just a housekeeper." Marcus shook his head. "No, you're someone who noticed a grieving husband, a tired father, a little girl who deserved a bed, and flowers that needed a vase. That's not housekeeping. That's hospitality." He reached into his bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside was an official offer. A newly created position, Regional Director of Guest Experience Training. Dolores stared at the papers. Her eyes widened. "Mr. Whitfield, I don't know anything about management." Marcus smiled warmly. "You already know the most important lesson. You see people, and honestly, that's something many executives spend their entire careers trying to learn." Tears gathered in Dolores's eyes. For 23 years, she had worked quietly behind closed doors, changing sheets, folding towels, cleaning rooms, helping strangers without expecting recognition. And now, for the first time in decades, someone had finally noticed her. A week later, Marcus sent another bouquet of red roses to her office. Attached to them was a small handwritten note. It said, "Thank you for seeing us, when it would have been so easy to look away." And perhaps that is what people remember most. Not the unkind words, not the embarrassment, not even the mistakes, but the rare moments when someone chooses to look a little closer and reminds us that kindness still exists in a world that often moves too fast to notice.